what about combining cleansing and charging? Can we do that at the same time? Some people think of cleansing and charging as two totally different, totally separate practices. So you cleanse the crystal to remove any unwanted energy from it, and then you charge it back up with positive energy. And so some people think of those as two separate practices and have two separate techniques that they use for that. First, they cleanse the crystal, then they charge the crystal. Other people kind of think of this as happening simultaneously. When I first started working with stones, I did this separately. I cleansed my crystals, usually using sound from my Tibetan singing bowl, and then I would charge the crystals with sunlight or moonlight. Those were mainly the two things that I would use to recharge my crystals. But then I got to the point where I kind of felt like as that energy was being cleansed, it was almost automatically charged. It's kind of like the energy is just refreshed. And so I kind of got away from the two-step process and just went to cleansing and kind of intending that my crystal then return to its perfect vibratory state, which for me was kind of like being charged. Now, the word charging also is maybe not the best term to use, and we use it really kind of willy-nilly in the crystal community. And I think that part of where this gets a little confusing as some people use the word charging to mean charging it up with new, full, positive energy. And that's like a really basic definition, but then there's also special forms of charging. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing and almost kind of bleeds into the area of programming. So you can also kind of charge your crystal with a specific energy based on the moon cycle. You can use different plant energies or aromatherapy oils to charge your crystals. And yes, on the one hand, this does put that positive energy back in. So it's going to that very basic definition of charging where we're just adding positive energy back into the crystal. But it goes into this other definition of charging, which is almost more like programming, where you're putting a specific purpose into the crystal. So just to give you an example of what I mean here, you can charge your crystal with sunlight or moonlight. That's pretty generic. That's just about putting positive energy vibration from the universe back into the crystal after you've removed unwanted energy. And this, like I said, is something that I used to do more often, but my experience has kind of shown me this isn't really super necessary. I feel like, you know, if you're kind of routinely maintaining your crystals, they really do stay kind of perfect and balanced. But then there's, you know, this other method of charging where maybe I want to charge the crystal with lavender oil to help with relaxation. So I might actually anoint the crystal with some lavender oil so that it can kind of be tuned into the energy of relaxation, because that's what I want to use my crystal for. Now this kind of, like I said, bleeds a little bit into programming, because all crystals have their inherent innate properties. They're going to do so much more than what we can ever hope or dream or imagine. So that's why, you know, when you look at a crystal book and you see some of the properties that are included, it can just be this huge long list of things that that crystal's great for. And honestly, in most instances, the crystal is going to do even 100 or 1,000 times more things than what that book listing says. Those might be some of the most common ways that crystal has been used. But if you want to kind of consciously direct the way that that crystal works, there's intention and there's programming. So I loved the explanation that I believe came from Sue Lilly. They were explaining that when we program a crystal, we're almost limiting it to do just that. And that's kind of what programming is. You're saying, hey, I need 100% of your focus, crystal, to go to this specific thing right now. And that's what programming is. Whereas in putting an intention into your stone is more about giving some general guidance, but giving the crystal the capability to still do what it needs to do energetically. Because maybe it can do 5 really amazing things for you right now. And if you give it some guidance through an intention and say, this is what I would like to do right now, then the crystal kind of knows and has that contract with you that, okay, I hear and see that this is what's important to you right now, but I also know about these other things you could really use help with right now, and I'm going to throw that into the mix. Whereas programming is more limited, and it's about, in some ways, imposing your focus on what that crystal should be doing. But you have to know, limiting the scope of how that crystal may be useful for you at that time. Do I think that there are times where programming can be beneficial? Yes, I do. I think that there are some times where, in kind of an emergency, in a situation where you really, really need something to happen quickly, or you need a very, very powerful change, I think that programming can be beneficial. It's not something that I would say to do commonly. It's not something that I would say generally to do with overall healing work, like for general balance and that kind of thing. But if there's an emergency or a very short time frame that you need something to kind of change or shift, then a program might be more appropriate. But I don't think that this comes up very commonly. I really think of more working with crystals with intention. And again, this is something I've really changed my thinking on over the years, because a lot of people are huge proponents of programming, especially like in more the kind of old school, early modern crystal work, where, you know, a lot of the authors from the early 80s to early 90s were huge proponents of programming. And I think a lot of people got very stuck on this mindset that all crystals that were for personal use had to be programmed and this and that. And I think that people are finding through experience and an objective perspective, which is really important, that programming is maybe not necessarily always the way to go, but intention and guidance with your crystals are welcome. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense about kind of some of the differences between cleansing, charging, programming, when one or the other might be beneficial or useful. I'm hoping that that is a little bit clearer.